most Americans favor strong gun laws and have done so for decades. There is an old rule in politics that says that a small but highly motivated minority can often win the day over a large but fairly apathetic majority. He was speaking open air on a college campus, which even seems to increase the heinousness of the crime. The Republican Party and Republican leaders, headed by President Donald Trump, seem to be using it as a moment to bring political and legal pressure to bear on political opponents more than to examine the actual motives of the shooter.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Hindustan Times and my name is Aayesha Varma. The United States has been shaken with the public assassination of right-wing activist Charlie Kirk, who had unwavering support for gun rights. But joining us at this moment is someone who has actively advocated for stricter gun control, Dr. Robert Spitzer, an author and political scientist. Sir, thank you so much for speaking with us.
You're most welcome.
Why do you think America has not, till now, changed its policy on guns?
America has relatively few gun laws, at least at the national level. And there's some important reasons that explain this. The first point to make is that most Americans favor strong gun laws and have done so for decades. In fact, one of the most consistent trends in American public opinion is support for stronger gun laws. So the question then is, why have we not seen the enactment of stronger gun laws at the national level? And essentially, there are two things at play. The first is it's pretty difficult to bring about major change at the national level in American governance because of the way the government is structured. But more specifically, the gun issue is one where the public supports stronger gun laws, but it is not a particularly important concern for most of the public most of the time. On the other side of the coin, there is a small but highly motivated minority of people that compose the gun rights community in America for whom the gun issue is their most important concern. And there is an old rule in politics that says that a small but highly motivated minority can often win the day over a large but fairly apathetic majority. And that essentially is the story of why we have not seen more extensive firearms regulations at the national level. There have been a few instances when stronger gun laws have been enacted at the national level, usually after some national tragedy or upsurge in crime, but it's not happened very often. And we have seen more recently in the last 10 or 15 years in America that support for gun rights or opposition to stronger gun laws has become fused with the Republican Party. That was not true in earlier decades in America, but increasingly a convenient litmus test for Republicans to demonstrate their loyalty to Republican Party principles is by opposing stronger gun laws, even though some of them privately would like to see stronger laws. And so because the two political parties in America, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, are so closely matched, and at times, of course, the Republican Party has been the dominant party, it has been able to block stronger gun laws. I would add one other thing, which is that we are a nation of federalism, and among the states, we have seen lots of activity. More liberal states have enacted many stronger gun laws. More conservative states have repealed what few gun laws they had. So we have seen a real bifurcation on the gun issue at the state level.
Do you think the Charlie Kirk murder will be a catalyst for change?
Well, the Charlie Kirk moment has really shocked America in a number of ways, partly because we've seen a variety of reactions. Now, this was an instance of a single individual from some distance who had a long-range hunting rifle who fired a single shot that proved to be fatal for Mr. Kirk as he was speaking open air on a college campus, which even seems to increase the heinousness of the crime. But the attention, as is often the case, is being turned away from issues of gun regulations and gun availability and gun possession, and more to the existing political schism within the country. And indeed, the Republican Party and Republican leaders, headed by President Donald Trump, seem to be using it as a moment to bring political and legal pressure to bear on political opponents, more than to examine the actual motives of the shooter and to try and learn from what this person was doing when he took it upon himself to assassinate a political figure, a young political figure, very dynamic, a right-wing figure, to be sure, who himself was known for rather incendiary rhetoric, but who was engaging in political discourse in a wide-open political discussion on a college campus, as he had done on hundreds of other occasions over recent years. So it's been a moment where the focus has really been turned away from guns and toward the incendiary politics in America of the moment.
When it comes to gun policy, you are someone who has vehemently fought for reform, particularly when it comes to the freedom to carry, saying that it should instead be treated like arms control. Why do you think there's so much resistance to this, despite there being, in 2025, over 300 shootings and counting till date?
Well, here's the historic, ironic background about gun carrying and gun possession. I've spent a great deal of time researching and writing about historic gun laws in America, and it turns out that in our first several hundred years of America's first several hundred years, we had lots and lots and lots of gun laws, thousands of gun laws of every imaginable variety. But the ascendance of a more extremist, more catalyzed, more highly motivated right wing, where the gun issue is viewed as a very political act, less having to do with hunting and sporting and much more having to do with assertions of political expression, is that it has worked to encourage gun ownership, gun carrying, and to try and roll back existing gun laws. And we've seen that happening in many states, and we have seen that to some degree at the national level as well. And indeed, the current presidential administration, the Trump administration, has essentially dismantled the federal agency charged with carrying out national gun laws, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the agency is called. And so there is really kind of a mythological view, but a deeply held view among the gun community that private citizen ownership of guns is patriotic, that it suppresses crime, that it is a way to prevent government tyranny, even though the actual record regarding those things suggests that prolific citizen gun ownership has the reverse effect. That is, it increases harm and gun violence, and it poses a greater threat to political instability. So despite the claims of the gun community, it doesn't really have that effect. Nevertheless, this mythology is tenacious, and it is a core belief among many conservatives and Republicans in America. Gun policy change at the national level is not an impossible dream. In fact, during President Biden's administration in the year 2022, he succeeded in getting Congress to enact, for the first time in 30 years, a new federal gun law. Now, it was very limited in its scope and provisions, but the fact is that he was able to build bipartisan support in Congress to enact that law. And that, I think, was an indication that it is possible to see stronger gun laws in America, but we are in a circumstance right now where the president, both houses of Congress, and the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, are pretty firmly in the hands of Republican and conservative forces. And during the era we are in right now, we certainly are not going to see any new gun laws. However, that would not forestall the idea that this could not occur at a future time in a future administration, because the control of government between the Republican and Democratic parties is very narrow. And it wouldn't take very much for the Democratic Party, if they are able to mobilize sufficient support, to change control of the government. And if the Democratic Party were to regain control of the White House and Congress, we almost certainly would see new national gun laws. I would add also one other confounding factor, which is the United States Supreme Court. It's a 9-member court, and 6 members are extremely conservative and are clearly devoted to rolling back gun laws and expanding gun rights. So that changes the picture.
I know that's something that Trump laid the foundation for in his last term. Would you be able to explain how significant the gun lobby is in this entire debate?
Well, the gun lobby is very powerful. It's very important, but not because they spend a huge amount of money and not because they are supported by a majority of Americans, because neither of those things actually is true. It's because there is a very devoted base all around the country of gun owners and gun rights people who feel fervently about the gun issue. And they are willing to do things in politics that the average American is not. They are willing to write a letter, to contribute money, to vote based on the gun issue, to express themselves in many ways that expands and extends the influence and reach of the gun rights community. And they're extremely influential within the Republican Party, which right now is the majority party. That is to say, it controls the branches of government. And I would say one other thing, which is that many people are aware that our Constitution has a Second Amendment pertaining to the right to bear arms. Now, historically, the Second Amendment pertained to citizen service in militias controlled by the government. However, the phrase "the right to keep and bear arms" is taken as kind of a banner to say that we have personal rights, and the Supreme Court has advanced that cause. So that has complicated the advancement of stronger gun laws.
So people are essentially running away with the interpretation of what's said in the Constitution, correct?
Well, with how they view it. Here's what the Second Amendment says. Excuse me. It says that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And beginning in 2008, the Supreme Court changed the legal meaning of that sentence to say, well, it now really is all about a personal right of average people to have a gun to defend themselves. That's not the historic meaning of that sentence, but that's what the court decided in 2008. Now, even under that interpretation, most gun laws, when challenged in court, have been upheld as constitutional. But it's not clear that the Supreme Court or some members of the court are satisfied with that, and that suggests a possible legal roadblock to the enactment of stronger gun laws. But the phrase "right to keep and bear arms" has taken on symbolic importance well beyond its legal meaning for many Americans.
All right, Mr. Spitzer, thank you once again for your time.
You're most welcome.